treacherous dark and waters below. The mouth that burns with the flames of perdition.
Devildom is the third full-length album from Norwegian death metal band Shaarimoth. We could call them a blackened death metal band, and one that is more centered around the classics of death metal to start, the extreme amplification of that more towards the early 90s and late 2000s to start. And this band has been around for about that long, having formed in about 2004 and released a pretty strong debut album in 2005 as Current 11. Now, this was most commonly compared to like Behemoth and maybe Archon and Faustus in hindsight. It had a certain style to it that was likened to Nile and whatnot, because that was kind of what was popular at the time, but it wasn't exactly what it sounded like. This was more of an occult death metal style. It was maybe closer to what Aeternus were doing at the time, but maybe less dramatic and more focused on brutality. And they made kind of a name for themselves right away with their themes and their sound as just a standout at the time. From that point, they really didn't show up for quite a long time. It took them 12 years to release their second album, Temple of the Adversarial Fire. It was a very strong album for 2017. It was one that I never had a chance to review, and it was maybe a shift more towards blackened death metal. It was a change, and as you'll find, each of their releases is different from the last. So their compositional skill had reached a new echelon. It was practically a new band 12 years later, and it feels like there's been another shift in the years since then for this third record, as we not only find the lineup changing just a little bit, but also the focus of their sound shifting a little bit more towards pure death metal in some sense, but reaching more of a strong technical and atmospheric acumen. And what that means is that the presentation is more focused on getting to the riffs. It's a little bit less wandering in its stance. And I think what we'll do is we'll get to a clip here, and you'll get a sense for how much this band has changed and where you might see them on today's landscape, if at all.
Call off the one outside, develop me, develop me, looking for myself.
So with the addition of a new rhythm section, which includes members of Ruim and Thy Darkened Shade, of course we have a far more capable and technical showing here, and you'd think that would lend more of a black metal or thrashing side to things, and in some sense it does. There's a certain compositional flair here that is inclusive of a lot of extreme metal with strong, what I would call canonical technique. There is always a bit of Morbid Angel in everything that this band has composed, but the rhythm section adds a tightness that was technically always there, but there's a feeling here that this is expert level stuff. It's more, there's what I would call elite death metal. And keeping in mind that if you're a fan of Mithras, Lantern, Bolzer, the way that those bands find dramatic peaks and maybe experimental movements, some of that seems to seep into what Shaarimoth have brought here, and it makes for an exciting modern death metal record, one that has a very polished production sound as well. And for me, what happens in the midst of all this is something that is much more interesting to me as a death metal fan than it is as a black metal fan. Although the lyrical focus is much more clear and direct here. And they're kind of getting to it in a very direct manner, and they're doing it in a way that is brutal. It is riff focused, it is rhythm focused, it is above all else a dynamic death metal record, and it does focus in that way. But it's also a spiritual record that does have a kind of a black metal derived intent and intensity that makes it interesting to a broad range of people, I would assume, but also maybe specifically for a type of death metal fan who wants something that is elaborate in its presentation, that is broad in its strokes, but can contain it all into something that is brutal, intense, and again, rhythm focused in a way that is just thrilling to me. I think I kind of undersell this record in some sense on the review and in my thoughts right now. I think it's a thrill to listen to. It's a really solidly atmospheric thing that is built from such insight that it's hard to convey how easy it is to listen to it without getting into the complexity of the compositional read. So I think the important thing is that there's depth here, that I could return to this album time and time again, that it is it's worthy of this very high recommendation in the sense that you're going to get more than a spin or two out of it. It's not just a gimmick. It's not just a quick thrill. There's some real rich illustration happening in these pieces that make them valuable, and I would say the conviction behind that is obvious and appreciable. So for me, this is one of my favorite records from October, and probably up there with some of the best death metal of the year for my taste. Just a great record in general. I think it's a good follow-up to what they had done back in 2017. It is a more bold, aggressive, and maybe even a collective glom of what they've done past, present, and now into the future. So very strong showing. Again, a very high recommendation. Check it out for yourself. It released back in October 31st. And read my review for more details on some of the moment-to-moment ideas and just the way that I felt about the record in general.
Open wide the jaws of immersion to the treacherous dark waters below.